and let me all wish you a good morning. And it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this wake-up call on the United Nations Environment Programme, short UNEP's Global Environment Outlook 7, or simply GEO-7. This land bank assessment is most comprehensive scientific review of the state of our global environment ever produced. It reflects the work of 287 experts from 82 countries, strengthened by the contribution of more than 800 reviewers, and for the first time by the knowledge and perspective of indigenous people and traditional knowledge holders from around the world. As policymakers, we have a responsibility to ensure that our decisions are guided by the best available evidence. Reports such as the GEO-7 are indispensable because they help us look beyond short-term political debates and focus on the long-term challenges that will reshape the future of our societies. The report comes at a particularly important moment. Around us, we increasingly hear calls to weaken or roll back environmental legislation in the name of competitiveness. But the science tells us a different story. GEO-7 reminds us that protecting our environment is not a burden on our economy. It is one of the foundations of stronger economy. A healthy economy needs healthy ecosystems, as healthy ecosystems provide clean water, fertile soils, pollination, climate regulation, and protection from flood and droughts. They are our natural infrastructure, and without them, there can be no lasting prosperity. For me, one of the report's most important messages is the concept of resilience. Resilience is much more than simply being able to withstand crisis. Resilience becomes an important mean of independence, economically, ecologically, digitally, and socially. A resilient Europe invests in innovation, in circularity, in clean technologies, and in restoring nature. It rewards those businesses that are already leading the transition instead of slowing them down by creating uncertainty. What makes GEO-7 particularly valuable is that it does not simply describe the problems we face. It also demonstrates that there is a way forward. It shows that investing in climate protection, biodiversity, pollution prevention, and sustainable resource use is not only environmentally necessary, but economically smart. It offers a roadmap for building societies that are both more sustainable and more prosperous. I firmly believe that we can build an economy that respects planetary boundaries while improving people's quality of life. Environmental protection and economic success are not competing objectives. They depend on one another. We are especially fortunate today to hear directly from 3 of the report's authors, and I'm very much looking forward to their presentation. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Veronika Frankova, sorry for the pronunciation, Victoria, head of UNEP office in Brussels, who will guide us through today's presentation. Veronika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Manuela, and many thanks to Globe EU for convening us. It is my great pleasure to also welcome you to this event, which is dedicated to the outcomes of this global environmental assessment. And it is called, very pertinently, Future We Choose. I don't think that we need to add anything more to this. This event is part of our global effort to ensure that the findings of this report reach to decision makers, policymakers, experts, stakeholders around the world and contribute to the informed environmental policy making, but not only environmental policy making. As Manuela mentioned, it's very much going across all sectors, and that's how the GEO-7 is constructed. So the GEO-7, as we heard, is actually a representation of culmination of several years of work by hundreds of scientists, experts, and contributors from all over the world, including from the EU region. We had contributions from Joint Research Centre, for example, European Environment Agency, and many other experts. So it's very much looking across all different fields. And the report provides a clear message. Environmental action is not only necessary, but it is also economically and socially beneficial. And as Manuela said, the investments in climate stability, health ecosystems, and pollution reduction can generate substantial economic gains while improving human well-being and resilience. And this I would like to underscore because in the last weeks we have seen huge temperature shifts, heat waves that hit Europe very, very badly. We see the forest fires ravaging through France, Spain, Portugal, Greece. We have even in Brussels extreme weather conditions, and that's very much what the GEO is talking about as well. The impacts of environmental degradation and climate change on our well-being, on our economy, and of course health. So we will hear today from the lead authors, some of the lead authors, because there was a huge team, but we selected a few sectors that we thought would be interesting for this particular debate. So we will cover especially energy, food, materials, and waste. And without any further delay, I would like to actually introduce our key speakers. The first one who will speak is Dr. Patrick Schröder, who is a Senior Research Fellow from Environment and Society Centre, Chatham House, and one of the GEO-7 coordinating lead authors. And he'll be focusing on the thematic of materials and waste and overall circular economy. The second speaker is Dr. Deborah Lay, coordinator of the National Climate Change Action Plan from the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Guatemala, and also coordinating lead author of the GEO-7. And she is focusing on energy. And the third speaker is Dr. Peter Alexander, Professor of Global Food Systems from University of Edinburgh, and also, of course, GEO-7 coordinating lead author, looking at food systems. So I think that we are in excellent hands. And Manuela, if you allow, I would straight on pass to the first speaker. Patrick, over to you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you, Veronica, for the introduction. Thank you to Globe EU and UNEP for organizing this. It's a great opportunity to engage with you. And we hope also to have a conversation with you at the end of the presentation to hear your questions and your comments. So we've prepared some slides. If we could show those, and then we can go through them. As Veronica mentioned, a future we choose. So these are some of the key insights. If you go to the next slide, that's us. The next slide. Thank you. And sorry, next slide. Yes. So the GEO-7 assessment. Key messages: there is an interlinked planetary crisis. So we have these four crises that are connected: climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, waste, and land degradation. And what GEO-7 has done, and this is where GEO-7 is special as a science policy interface, we've looked at the interconnection between these challenges. So what's different, for example, with the IPCC mostly looks at climate change. IPBES looks at biodiversity loss. There's a new panel on pollution and waste, but they have not looked at it in an integrated way as we've done in GEO. So the world's already warmed 1.3 degrees. And as Veronica mentioned, we're feeling this in Europe very much. And in the media, I think there's growing awareness also of the general public that Europe is warming faster than other places on the planet. There are 1 million species at risk. That's out of over 8 million species, so a significant threat to life on the planet and biodiversity. And there's 100 million hectares of land being degraded every year. This is specifically relevant also in the context of current crisis around fertilizers and food production. So a very dire situation at the moment going forward. If we go to the next slide. So there's something. Yeah, so the interlinked crisis, this is caused by unsustainable systems of production and consumption, and energy, food, in the context of unsustainable economic, finance, and governance systems. So this is one of the key messages from GEO. These are not only environmental issues that need to be addressed, but particular the way economic and finance systems are structured. This requires reform to address the environmental problems. So one of the key messages is also this needs to go beyond just the environmental departments or environmental ministries, but it's a whole of government and whole of society approach that is needed. In terms of the international context, so we're not on track of meeting any of these, including also not only the environmental ones, but also the social ones. I just attended events in New York at the High-Level Political Forum, and the SDGs are not in a very good place at the moment. So we're not on track of meeting most of these targets either. Next slide, please. So now this is specifically on climate change and tipping points. So there are a number of tipping points. You can see this, those 5 ones in the green box at the upper left corner. Greenland ice sheet is the most urgent one. So we're very close to breaching these tipping points. And these will likely be passed within the next few decades once the 1.5 degrees threshold, and we're not on track of meeting that. And we'll have to work very hard to keep temperatures below the Paris target of 2 degrees. Based on current trends, so the world is projected to warm between 2.4 and 3.9 degrees by 2001. And within GEO, the assessment also found out that the rate of warming is greater than the central estimates of previous IPCC reports. So the recent temperature increases of the last few years show that warming is happening at an accelerated pace. Next slide. So within GEO, that's not only bad news, but we've worked with scenario modelers from the from the International Resources Panel, where we looked at a combination of both technical and societal scenarios in an integrated way. And the modeling shows that it is still possible to achieve the environmental and social goals of the international agreements and to prevent runaway climate change, worsening biodiversity loss. But it requires unprecedented change, innovative transformations of the economic and finance systems that then will enable us to transform materials, energy, and food systems. So it's a combination of both technological and behavioral changes that is required. As I mentioned before, a whole of government and whole society approach is required, and it's urgent. So we cannot, as we heard also before at the beginning from Manuela, we need to accelerate rather than slow down transitions. Next slide, please. So we have some information about costs. So there are some short-term costs to the transition, but inaction is by far more expensive and outweighs the costs of the transformation. So the estimate is that about $7 trillion per year is needed until 2050, especially for developing net zero transition. But the benefits will materialize, and we estimate an increase to about 20 trillion per year, starting from 2017, and that's compared to scenarios without action. Next slide, please. So we've looked also at leveraging system interaction to accelerate the transformation. So there are different systems, energy and economy and finance, energy, food, and waste and materials. And I'm not sure if you're able to see that, but circularity we've identified in the report as a cross-cutting enabler for all of these systems. So circular economy circularity is not only relevant to reduce waste, but it also applies to the energy sector. It also applies to food, and it applies to also how to transform the broader economic system from a linear model towards one that is circular and keeps the value of materials and products and components over time. Please keep going on the slide. There's a few more bits that come in. Won't go into detail, but we identified a number of levers that are needed for the transformation. And within those levers, for example, again, the whole of government approach is important. And yeah, I'll leave it here. This is basically the systems approach that we were trying to show, and in each of the chapters on the solution set that is explained in more detail. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned this before. We have these 5 solutions chapters: economic and finance, materials waste, energy, food, and the environmental systems. Within each of these, there's pathways outlined. Within each of these pathways, specific policy actions that looked at with guidance to policymakers. We've tried to identify policies that already exist and work, and explain how these can be replicated or scaled up in other contexts. So this will be explained later also by Debbie and Peter for the energy and food, and I will have some more on the materials and waste context. Next slide, please. So this is the chapter on circular economy, although, as I mentioned, the circularity principle is also relevant for many other chapters. If you're familiar with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation concept or diagram of the circular economy, we try to use that, but add some additional components, specifically highlighting a few things. First of all, by putting this group of people, we work with designers, as you might have seen from previous slides. The GEO is very much trying also to communicate scientific message in a format that is accessible, let's say, to general public. By putting people at the center of the transformation, often circular economy approaches come across as very technocratic, but the transformation is there for people, and people need to be part of it. So in addition to that, the circular economy approach is not only about the materials that flow, not about only looping resources back into the production and consumption cycles, but it's also very much about maintaining assets that we have. And that's the natural capital and basically the resource base, and including biodiversity, freshwater resources, land, but also maintaining the man-made assets that we have already accumulated over time. So this is also about materials, but also the value that's contained in these systems. We go to the next slide. So these are the 5 pathways that we've identified. So design out waste and pollution and enable material recovery. And this is in a way now addressed through European legislation that's already on the way, through the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, which will be looking at new design criteria for a range of value chains. So this is very good in the context of the European Union. These processes are already underway. And from discussions that we're having, many countries, including the European Union trading partners, very much looking at these new design standards in order to ensure their market access to Europe, but also to improve their production and reduce the environmental impacts they have. The second one, create fair and effective markets for circular goods and services. This is very much relevant for secondary raw materials. In most instances, the primary materials are still cheaper than secondary materials, and that's a major barrier that needs to be addressed. And as I understand, this is one of the objectives of the Circular Economy Act that's currently under preparation. So it'll be a really important piece of legislation, also leveraging, or let's say, taking the Circular Economy Action Plan to the next level. We have one of the pathways on redirecting finance from linear to circular. This requires a number of individual actions, including building capacity for financial sector, who often do not have the appropriate methodologies to assess the value propositions of circular business models. So this type of developing new methodologies, taxonomy, and building capacity within the financial industry is important. Enabling a fair and global trade in circular goods and services. This very much relates to how waste and secondary materials are being classified. It is about preventing dumping of waste between countries, but it's also about, it's not about having less trade, but having more transparent and also more traceable trade. So the whole traceability agenda is linked to this. EU battery passport will be relevant in this context to enable cross-border trade. And the final point that I also tried to make before, circularity needs to be a societal goal. So it needs to be owned by citizens. Citizens need to be an active part of it, and citizens need to be enabled to also drive the transformation through initiatives like repair cafes, through city-level circularity action. So this will be really important to connect, say, European policies from the Circular Economy Act towards then also city and community level in the member states. Part of this is also increasing confidence of consumers in secondary goods, confidence in refurbished and repaired devices. All of this will be part of it. Next slide, please. I'm almost coming to the end, and then I'll hand over to Debbie and Peter. This is a global flow diagram of materials on the global level, and you see what's actually currently being looped back through recycling is a very little amount, so less than 10 gigatons per year. We need to the effort is to loop back all these solid waste emissions back into the economy, but we also need to look at the stock that we're currently accumulating. So this is maybe also quite small to see and how to describe on the floor, but we're accumulating a lot of materials in the built environment, in our products, electronics, data centers. These are materials and resources that are available for use not only now, but also towards the end of life. So that's where we have a lot of value that can that can become circular. But we need to plan for this already at this point to be able to access these materials in the future and not turning those into waste products. Sorry, next slide, please. This is again modeling that was done by the modelers from the Intergovernmental International Resource Panel, and it's aligned also with messages that were produced by the Global Resources Outlook earlier. So this is a projection of primary resource extraction over the next few decades, and the business as usual would be to reach around 160 billion tons of extraction by mid-century. So with a circular economy scenario, the estimate is that we could reduce that and peak at around 120 billion tons per year by mid-century, which would be a significant reduction in primary resource extraction, which would result in environmental benefits. And this model only looked at existing recycling technologies, projected some increases, but it didn't look at, let's say, higher level circular economy approaches, an increased share of reuse, an increased share of remanufacturing, repair. I think, and there are now other studies that show for critical materials, for example, in Europe, well over half of the demand by 2050 could be met through secondary materials. That's also a number we have in the report, and it's also confirmed by a recent Horizon study that was published. So a lot of circularity potential that we're currently not using, and through both technology innovation as well as wider societal changes, and then changes to pricing and cost structures in the economy, we can achieve much higher savings in resources. I think that was my last slide. Apologies for my voice, but I think I'll stop here and then hand over back to Victoria, and then Veronica, and then to Debbie.
I think that we can go straight to Debbie because we are very much short for time, but maybe just also appreciate, Patrick, what you mentioned about circularity. That also resonates well with the European Environment Agency, Europe's Environment 2025 report, which is showing that there is actually very modest, if I may say it like this, a very modest circular economy increase in the EU, but it's certainly not as high as it should be. But we may hear a little bit more about that. But needless to say, the European Environment Agency was very much part of this process, and there's no surprise that both reports are very much talking about the same outcomes or same highlights. So Debbie, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for this kind invitation to present. I'm not seeing the slides anymore. I don't know if anyone else is. No. Okay.
I know they're coming. They're coming.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a bit about the energy systems. And as Patrick has already said, people are at the center of action. And as you've been able to also see, GEO-7 was really much also centered around equity and justice. So these are some of the parts that I want to share with you today. So when we talk about an energy transition, what we hear most commonly is perhaps the part of emissions reductions and decarbonization. And while these are certainly topics that we address in GEO-7, we go more broadly into what are all the elements that are part of a just and equitable energy system transition. First of all, we want to ensure universal access to clean energy. This goes both for electricity and cooking, especially but not limited to rural areas. Also focusing on, for example, any for communities not yet connected to the grid, that any new connections be of, for example, renewable energy. And while we also talk a lot about the need to increase generation, we also want to focus on the need for energy efficiency and demand side measures. There are actions that we can take to reduce our own consumption. So that, of course, will also decrease the demand of generation we need. As I mentioned earlier, we do need to decarbonize energy system. And while we talk about renewable energy, sometimes it is often overlooked that renewable energy, or for example, to achieve the electricity targets that are being touted for the COP31, the UNFCCC COP31 in Antalya, we also need critical energy transition minerals. And how can we achieve an environmental sustainability in this value chain? So not just extraction, but also looking at the recycling and reuse or disposal. So of course, this part also links quite well to the circular economy concepts that Patrick was just mentioning. But part of how we achieve this is that we need to phase out fossil fuel subsidies and investments, how we can repurpose them. So that leads us also to not just actions that need to happen within economic and financial systems, but also the transformations that need to happen within the economy and finance to enable actions such as phasing out fossil fuel subsidies to happen. And when all these are taken in conjunction, we help support just an inclusive energy transition. So if we go to the next slide, please, I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail of ensuring responsible sourcing, production, and use of critical energy transition minerals that are needed. Because we also need to keep in mind that worldwide, and including in many European countries, while we want to increase the goal of renewable energy generation, we also need to upgrade the electrical grids. While smart grids are also discussed, grids need to be modernized. So, and these, of course, also require different minerals. And what we're looking at in each one of the solutions I mentioned in the slide before was how to minimize environmental and social harm. So if we go specifically to critical energy transition minerals, and knowing that many of the places where you find these minerals are fragile ecosystems, is how can we better engage local communities and uphold indigenous rights in mineral development? How can we adopt these sustainability standards for mining and processing throughout the value chain? How can we promote the circular economy practices to reduce the primary mineral demand, and then foster international cooperation for ethical and sustainable supply chain? So very much in line with what Patrick described. If we go to the next slide, please. A critical energy transition mineral value chain has some core principles of circularity, sustainability, and just transition. And this is important to keep in mind because when Patrick mentioned the different sectors or solution pathways that GEO-7 addresses, we also need to keep in mind that these are all interconnected. So whatever happens in the energy system is not limited to energy. So for example, whenever we talk about any renewable energy generation, or whether mineral extraction is, what are the impacts on land, on food sources?
No.
So sorry, David.
Pardon.
Yeah, can we ask?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, and I think I have one more slide. If we could go to the next one, please. Showing how these how these solution pathways link to each other, and how, and if we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So we can see here what are the different solutions that I mentioned earlier, and whether they have a positive, neutral, or negative impact with food systems, environmental systems, circularity, and economic systems. So we can see that there are solutions that are available today that can help have positive outcomes throughout these different systems. And these are things that we also need to look out for. Just for example, not going from big oil to big mining, or having an energy transition so focused on decarbonizing that it also puts in jeopardy food security. So these are solutions that GEO-7 puts out that meet all of them, and especially highlights where we can make stronger handshakes across sectors. And I believe that's all for energy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Debbie. I can jump straight in, I think. So yeah, I'm going to give a quick overview of this chapter on food system transformation pathways. So as we've been hearing from the other systems, you know, the current global food system is environmentally and socially unsustainable. So here we're thinking about the food system spanning the whole chain from production, processing, through trade, retail to consumption and waste. But obviously that includes, you know, the policies and incentives that help shape that system. So the food system is obviously essential for nutrition, but provides, you know, livelihoods, economic activity and cultural value. But it's a major driver of environmental change, contributing significantly to climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation and pollution. So just to give one example, you know, animal source foods alone contribute something around 15% of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions globally. But despite those kind of environmental consequences, the food system's still not delivering healthy diets for everyone. You know, we produce something like a third more cereals per person globally than we did in the 1960s through the Green Revolution. But, you know, there's still 700 or 800 million people who are undernourished and billions of people who are living with obesity or overweight, with dietary ill health, you know, continuing to increase. So the question isn't really about, you know, producing more food globally, but to make sure that healthy and sustainably produced food can be accessible and affordable to everybody. Thinking about it sort of in terms of externalities, you know, health, environmental externality costs, you know, costs not associated with the market price are estimated to be something of the order of $20 trillion US dollars per year. And to give that huge number a bit of context, that's something like double the estimated market value of all the foods that are consumed, something around 9 trillion US. You know, we've got this well-known story about the loss and waste of food, and that certainly provides an opportunity in reducing that, and that's essential, but it's not sufficient on its own. And kind of also, as you know, you'll understand, you know, the environmental change and geopolitical disruptions are impacting the food system, and there's growing risks from those. You know, recent events in the Straits of Hormuz, and before that, related to Ukraine, sort of demonstrate the interconnectedness within the global food system, and also the connection between systems. You know, between the fossil fuel sector and the food sector, to some extent, as Debbie was describing. So we need to think about this sort of the need for this transformation, or the outcome of this transformation as being both in terms of environmental agenda and also in terms of resilience. Next slide, please. Great. So what did we propose in the GEO? To achieve a sort of environmentally and socially sustainable transformation, we don't just need to do one thing, we need a whole package of measures, and we identified, similarly to the other systems, 5 pathways. The first pathway here is to shift to environmentally and sustainable and healthy diets. So this is sort of lowering red and processed meat consumption, particularly where intakes are high, fewer ultra-processed foods, and more consumption of a diverse mix of minimally processed foods such as whole grains, fruit, veg, legumes, and nuts. The second pathway is looking at sort of improving crop, livestock, and aquatic food production, both through measures such as sustainable intensification, but also sort of nature-based solution approaches to improve productivity and efficiency, improving soil health, ecosystem health, protecting biodiversity, and reducing pollution. The third pathway, relates to what Patrick was talking about largely, you know, so reducing food loss and waste, but increasing circularity right across the food system. So this includes, you know, through storage, transport, retail, household level, kind of all levels, but also making better use of byproducts and recycling nutrients as well. And the fourth pathway looks at sort of novel food and production processes. So this includes things like alternative proteins, such as cultured meat, and these have the opportunity to displace sort of animal source foods, although we recognise that the sort of uncertainty around acceptability of that from a consumer perspective and the environmental footprint. So adoption at scale may be unlikely in the short term. And the final pathway looks at sort of market structure, trade and governance. So it addresses both concentration of market power, for example, among transnational firms, as well as the balance between local and global food systems. And we recognise that both local and global systems kind of each have benefits and vulnerabilities. So the chapter emphasises a balance there and the need for joined up governance and international coordination. So those are the kind of the 5 pathways at the highest level, and these are not sort of alternatives, but they need to be combined to transform that system and improve both efficiency and the consumption patterns, with each requiring changes kind of right across that system. So next slide, please. So hopefully I've got a little bit of time to talk about one of those pathways in a slightly more detail. And I focused on the first one, which is changing diets, because without that shift in what people consume, this transformation wouldn't be possible. So here we highlighted several areas for action to try and achieve that. The first was to try and better reflect the true cost of food in consumer prices, so to better reflect those externality costs, health and environmental externality costs in the prices that consumers see and experience. So here we highlighted the role of reform of taxes and subsidies to do that, but recognise that such measures would increase prices for some foods, and that needs to be paired with social protection and support for lower income households. And the aim is to try and align prices and incentives more closely with health and environmental outcomes, but ensuring that a healthy diet is affordable to everybody. And food environments are important as well, and regulation is part of that story. So food environments, including marketing label, portion sizes, and other sort of choice architecture, can influence consumer behaviour, and regulation can help shift those environments so that healthier and more sustainable options can be easier for consumers to recognise and to choose. We also looked at public procurement, which can kind of directly impact food consumption in those contexts, in schools and hospitals and other public institutions, but also sort of engender a wider change to practices. And more broadly, thinking about changes in that sort of way, if you like, to public awareness of food literacy and collective actions can help shift sort of social norms more broadly, and change expectations about what people find normal, acceptable, and desirable in a diet. So that's kind of an overview of a little bit more detail on that pathway. But overall, we were suggesting that sort of voluntary action alone by consumers and the industry is unlikely to deliver the scale and pace of change required for this transformation, and therefore it needs to be supported by sort of policy changes to align incentives and regulations towards that sort of healthier diet and environmental sustainability and resilience. I'd like to try and kind of conclude more positively, that we believe this food transformation is possible and urgent, but it requires multiple actions right across the food system. So thanks. I'm going to hand back, I think, to Veronica to moderate.
Thank you so much. I'm checking now with Manuela. If you want to step in, Manuela, at the stage.
Veronica, please, the floor is yours. I have some questions, but I want to leave the audience first to have the questions. And if you can lead us through the question and answers, please do so.
Very good. Thank you very much. And indeed, now it's time for you participants to ask whatever you think that ask or comment. You may have different views. That's also a point of this discussion. So please raise your hand, put camera on or not, your choice. You can also put your questions or comments in the chat. So please use whatever means that you feel most comfortable with. But I don't see any hand yet. So maybe Manuela, if you have questions, maybe you can kick off that.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very impressive presentations. And I would have my first question to Patrick regarding circular economy. I mean, we in Europe want to become the leaders of circular economy, and we are all looking on the Circular Economy Act that is coming and all the legislation finally. And my question would be, do you know how circularity is seen in other countries and how far they are already in circular economy? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Manuela, for the question. And this is also something we try to capture in the GEO, and this is also some ongoing work that we're looking at, how countries around the world are designing, implementing national strategies on circular economy. So we've done an overview, and actually by the end of 2025, there were 101 national strategies or roadmaps on circular economy. Some countries had iterations, and this is a change from only 4 national strategies in 2016. So over the 10-year period, it's seen a real growth in countries adopting it. And that's not only in Europe, but also in South America. For example, Brazil last year came up with a new national strategy, also in Africa and ASEAN. China is also very active, Japan. So all these countries are looking at Europe for policy in many cases, which is a good opportunity for Europe to engage on the circular economy around the world. And yeah, so this and these national strategies, they have individual policy commitments. So we've mapped over 4,000 individual policies, but the strategies are higher level. The policies then are directly for implementation. And they cover a whole range of sectors, including energy, food, but also plastics, the built environment, construction, electronics. So you can really see it's an approach that is relevant for most of the economy. So another indication, you might be familiar, the World Circular Economy Forum that's organized annually by CITRA. Last year, the forum took place in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. And this is always linked also to national strategy development, right? And shortly afterwards, Brazil actually started or published their national strategy. Later this year in September, the World Circular Economy Forum will take place in Gujarat in India. And so this will then also drive again national policy development. So it's a good policy trend to internationally. So that's kind of a positive news to see globally.
I still don't see any questions or hands. Maybe it's just me. So if I'm omitting anybody, please jump in. But in the meantime, then allow me to ask a question. And I would actually ask Debbie, because you talked about we know that and you all three showed that the GEO is very much integrated assessment. But in many policy discussions around the world, but including in the EU and in EU member states, you very often see that the discussions are still siloed, looking at different sectors separately. Where do you see, from your perspective, the biggest gap in the systems, and how do you think then the policy discussions should be shaped?
Yes, thank you very much, Veronica. Really good question. I think now with the higher focus on equity and justice that is being put, especially like when we talk to meet also the sustainable development goals, there's a lot of or increased focus on not just how we can, for example, reduce emissions, but also reduce biodiversity loss, discussing across the different environmental crisis. And I think there's a greater realization now, and it's also highlighted throughout different examples and case studies in GEO-7 of how when actions are taken in a very siloed way, we often overlook the many synergies we can have with other areas. For example, through bioenergy with the food and environment sectors, but also how maladaptation, for example, or different trade-offs can happen when we don't pay attention to these other sectors. These are also well documented, and I think throughout the world, including in the European Union, there are already some examples of how this comes together. I think the part of minerals and energy and circularity is one of the clearer examples. Or, for example, when we talk about bioenergy, not just bioeconomy, but bioenergy specifically, when done at small scales, can also benefit land use change and food security and water. So at different scales throughout different examples, we can see that. And if we look at another example, for example, on energy efficiency or demand management, this is something we see also, for example, when we talk about water. So it's not just focused on energy sector per se. So, but even though I'm positive, probably saying it in a very positive note, I think there's a lot of there's many gaps. There's still a lot of steps we need to take because, of course, in each country, ministries worked in a siloed way, but different reports, for example, from the IPCC, from MIPIS, reinforced by GEO and the different bodies keep emphasizing this need. I think the water, energy, food nexus was the first one that was mentioned. Then IPBES nexus assessment talked about biodiversity, health, food, water, and climate change. So whatever the different mixes are, I think there's already growing evidence that when you work across sectors, when you work in a systemic way, you also have cost savings. Because instead of funding two big separate initiatives, you can just add a little bit more funding to one of them to get multiple objectives. So yeah, it's more effort is needed, but we're already seeing some of this emerging. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And I'm still looking for questions, but it's probably because it's early in the morning. But
Victoria,
there is one. I have a question
yes.
from Luisa Fondello.
Very
Veronica.
good. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Good morning. I'm Luisa. I work at Caritas Europa. It's a pleasure to meet you and thank you for this meeting. I have two questions, if I may, actually, if there's time. One of them is about demand reduction. So in Caritas, we have developed our own recommendations for the new EU Act on Circular Economy. And the most important for us is to follow the waste hierarchy and start with reduction. And we think it's important that this is prominent in the new Act. And you mentioned in our presentations that the report does touch upon the demand side measures. So I was just curious if you could elaborate a bit more on that. And the second question is about energy systems. We have also been doing a lot of research and consulting with Caritas organizations that actually have projects on the ground about the role the different actors play in the energy transition in terms of production of energy. So the private sector, governments, citizens, local communities. So we did some research and developed some recommendations as well regarding public ownership, decentralized energy systems, energy cooperatives, for example, different structures that could connect people on the ground, having more decision-making power over the kind of energy we want to produce, how much and what for. So I was also just curious to know if you have any thoughts on this. Thank you.
So that would be for a quick reaction from Patrick and then from Debbie. And we have only 5 more minutes just to alert you.
Okay, very briefly, yes, fully agree with your point about demand side and also the hierarchy. So as I tried to mention, so circular economy is not only about recycling, but also like the 3 R's, for example, reduce is a key approach. And this is very much linked to a few things that we've highlighted around issues around planned obsolescence So how do we reduce demand for these products, but at the same time increase then uptake of, let's say, products that are longer lasting, extending lifetime through repair and refurbishment. We also talked about in the pathway on societal transformations, the importance of thinking around sufficiency. So I think these discussions are important also for the Circular Economy Act, and they there's not one measure for demand side, but there's multiple approaches, and the pricing again will also come in to reduce demand of extremely impactful or products with very high environmental footprint. So yes, very much agree with the message of Caritas.
Debbie?
Yes, thank you, Luisa, for your question about actors and ownership. In the report, we do talk about governance and how, in general, when we talk about, I know it was mentioned earlier on about the topic of resiliency, and probably I didn't mention it in when I discussed energy system, but part of one of the goals is to have resilient infrastructure. And one of the parts of resilience is how do we create this redundancy in the system in place in case of climate impact. So the part of ownership is important both to create this resilience, but also to shift a little bit or start creating this shift in power dynamics and into the decision making. And why I mention resiliency and redundancy here is because there is a lot of evidence pointing at the need to have decentralized systems to help make energy systems more robust. So when you have decentralized systems, you can always have the grid as a backup, for example, and decentralized could be a standalone home or it could be a community system. And when you have this public ownership, whether it's an association, a cooperative, or what other legal entity you have, it creates these different forms in which users can actually have this power to decide how to best use that energy and also get more independent. So in the case of any climate impact, you can either, you have your own system, but you also have it as a backup. So this part of governance and ownership, I think it's twofold, definitely. One of them is to have decision-making power, but the other one is to create this redundancy that will ultimately make you more resilient in the case of extreme weather events that I know you all experienced in Europe in the last couple weeks. Thank you.
So we need to come to an end, but a very, very quick question to Peter. You talked about how food systems are contributing to the global environmental crisis, and you already set some also solutions. But in your view, what would be the one most impactful solution that can be done in the food sector?
Well, that's why I highlighted diet or dietary change, and actually it relates to the question that was just asked about demand, on reducing demand. So changing and reducing the foods that we consume and the demand, how the consumers place demand on the food system through what they're consuming, I think is the single biggest thing we can do. And obviously, how do you achieve that was what I was trying to allude to. And I think there are sort of voluntary actions both in the industry and at the consumer level, but I do think we need to get prices to better reflect the true cost of that food in terms of the environmental harms that different foods do are not well represented in the foods that we consume. And again, to reiterate something I said or tried to make the point in what I said is that there is plenty of food in the food system to feed everybody. We just don't use it very well. The animal source foods, food waste, and other distributional aspects. So it's not about producing more food; it's about producing better food and distributing that more equitably. Which and demand plays a really big really big part of that.
Yeah, no, that's actually what I found very striking in the presentation and in the report. I mean, there are many striking things, but the what you showed on the slide, the 30 to 40% of food produced is being lost and wasted, and that we have the global food production on very high level and it's growing, but yet at the same time we have what you mentioned, 700 to 800 million people remain hungry. This is a situation that can be easily fixed, actually. So thank you very much for this. And Manuela, I think that we reached the end, but for me, it's always very interesting to go a little bit more into detail. And the report and the presentations very clearly showed that we do have solutions. We just need to choose them and work with them, whether we sit in the parliament or in the government, or whether we sit in industry or civil society, or whether we are individuals. As Peter said, it's also about individual choices, what we do and how we act. So I think it's a reminder for us all that the situation is really not very, very, very good at the moment. We see the evidence every single day in Europe, in all regions. But important message from the GEO is also that the cost of inaction is very high. And if we invest in environmental protection now, it's much cheaper than bearing the consequences at later stage. The numbers are very clear there. And this is a very, very good reminder for everybody, for all the stakeholders. And one thing that I sometimes miss in the debates is what also was mentioned by at least one of the speakers is the people-centered approach. The environmental protection is not just for the environmental protection. It is social issue. It is economic issue. And that we need to put very strongly in the debate. It is very much about our well-being, about access to clean water, access to clean air. We take it very much as granted, especially in Europe, that we have clean water. But if we don't invest into it now, and I don't mean only financial investment, then we very soon will not have the clean water or the clean air. But the global impacts of climate change, unfortunately, we do see that in big magnitude now in every country. So apologies for this longer conclusion, but I do think that we need to look at the picture from all the different angles and underscore the social issue. We will also share with this group the executive summary of the report, and we are also preparing for communication purposes even more concise messages that we will share with you, Manuela, and the Globe EU, and we will be very happy that these messages would be used for your work in the different institutions that you are sitting. And with this, Manuela, I'm passing the floor back to you, and with huge thanks to you and the team.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I would like also to do 2 short conclusion remarks, but Sirpa, you raised your hand very quickly, please, because we are at the end of our discussion.
Thank you very much for excellent discussion. My question only would be, Veronica, for you and others, could you share the slides, plus if you have some other slides that maybe could be used in some other context when we have our presentations? That would be wonderful to have them for background, and then those ones click that we can use further on. Thank you.
For sure, I think that it's possible to share them. And I would like also to say again, nature protection is not about protection plants and animals only. It's about the protection of our health, of our agriculture, of our economy, and of our well-being. And it was very interesting to hear that also the world is looking at Europe, what Europe is doing. And so I think, and I don't exaggerate if I say that at the moment we're living in a time of historic significance. Perhaps I think we are in a phase as decisive as the one Europe faced after the Second World War. Back then, the focus was on peace and reconciliation, but today the focus is on our role in a completely new world order. And that is why we must ask ourselves a fundamental question. What sort of Europe do we want to be? A Europe that merely reacts on crisis, or a Europe that shapes its own future? A Europe that lives on dependencies, or a Europe of strength and autonomy? And for me, it is very clear Europe must become resilient, and your report showed us the way. And I strongly believe if politics, business, and society take joint responsibility, then Europe will not only become crisis-proof, it will be the strongest response to the challenges of the 21st century. So thank you very much, all of you, and looking forward to keep on the discussion.